Okay, welcome everyone. It's June 25th. This is the Planning Advisory Board meeting. It is 6:02, and we're going to call the meeting to order. And with that, I will read a roll call, and please indicate if you're here. We'll start with Melanie Hartwig Davis. Do I see Melanie?
I believe she's on vacation, not going to be able to join us tonight.
Okay. Lawrence Blevins.
Here.
Thank you. Edward Edmonds.
Here.
Michael DePietro.
Here.
Hi, Michael. Van Mason.
Here.
Hi, Van.
Hi.
I know Elizabeth is here and myself, Gus Kurtz. So with 6 members present, we do have a quorum. So welcome everyone this evening. It's been a while since we've had a meeting, and I'm glad we're doing this via Zoom because it was really, really hot to have to get in the car and ride down to Annapolis or get to Annapolis and fight that little bit of storm that came in real quick. So with everyone here, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. A second.
Okay, a motion's been made and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? The agenda is approved. Now a motion for the minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Okay,
A
motion's been made to approve.
A second.
And second.
Second.
Okay, motion's been made and second. All in favor to approve the minutes as presented? Aye.
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 Any nays? The minutes are approved. So tonight's agenda, we'll start with the draft hazard mitigation plan. Staff from the Office of Emergency Management will provide a briefing on the draft plan before we open the floor for public comment. After tonight's meeting, there will be an opportunity to send in written comments to the Planning Advisory Board at aacounty.org. And these comments must be in by Tuesday, July 15th. Then the PAB will meet again on Wednesday, July 23rd, to deliberate on the plan. So with that, I'm going to turn over the floor to Preeti Emmerich. The floor is yours, Preeti.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Preeti Emmerich. I'm the director of the Arundel County Office of Emergency Management. So I will go ahead and share my screen. Try to find my presentation. Hold on. It's kind of weird that did that. Can you see my plan, my presentation? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, my name is Preeti Emmerich, Director of the Arundel County Office of Emergency Management, and I am here to discuss the Hazard Mitigation Plan 2025 update. Thank you all for giving us this opportunity to meet and to go over the plan, and I know there'll be a chance for questions later. So just an overview of what we're going to discuss in our time. What is hazard mitigation? Why is it important? Project overview of the past year of the steps we have taken, the hazard profiles identified, new mitigation strategies, the outreach that we did through public presentations and meetings with the public, some of the next steps, especially since this has to be updated every 5 years, and then any questions. I will say in terms of the hazard profiles identified, there are a lot. So we're going to go through the process of the top hazard, that we identified just to show you how the plan is laid out. So this is FEMA's definition of hazard mitigation. This is also what we used in the plan. It's the effort to reduce the loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disasters. We aim to minimize or eliminate the long-term risk, not only to human life, property, from natural hazards, and especially from human-caused hazards, which is a new addition to this 2025 update. So why is it important? Obviously, it's very important to identify and prioritize the risks. We want the community to take proactive measures. We want them to reduce vulnerabilities. I know, I'm sure you guys have heard this saying with hazard mitigation, every dollar spent on mitigation is $6 saved, right? We know mitigation works. We want to make sure that the community understands what the hazards are and also takes the appropriate actions. Saves lives, reduces the recovery cost, and it improves resiliency. We want our communities to recover quicker when there is a disaster. So this is the project overview. So by law, the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 states that we have to develop a mitigation plan that outlines the processes for identifying the hazards, risks, and vulnerabilities under each jurisdiction of government. We have to have a plan in place to access FEMA mitigation grants. So when there is a disaster and we do get a federal declaration, we are eligible for mitigation grants so that we can hopefully mitigate when the next time a disaster happens, because disasters do happen. It has to be updated every 5 years. It goes through the process of where FEMA has to approve it. And then it has to go through the various approval process of the jurisdiction. So we got the FEMA approval. It's called an approval pending adoption on May 30th, 2025. Now, with the 2018 Hazard Mitigation Plan, it did expire June 14th, 2025. We did submit a request for a 6-month extension based on the circumstances that we received federal funding way too late in order to start the project on time. That was submitted on June 16th. We have not heard from FEMA yet. Regardless of whether that extension is granted or not, we are still going to go through the process, obviously, with the PAB being the first step, with the approval, and then the formal adoption after hearings in front of the county council. So an overview of the update. I know we had discussed a little bit about the planning areas. One is obviously the county itself, and then the town of Highland Beach. The city of Annapolis has its own hazard mitigation plan. They were also involved in the planning process because obviously we want to make sure that and they also included us in their planning process because obviously we're linked together and we want to understand each other's hazards and the vulnerabilities and the risks and what each community can do. As I stated before, we're updating the natural hazards, but of course we did add the human-made hazards to the plan. Again, a new addition. And we worked extensively with county departments, agencies, and with the public to receive input for developing these new mitigation actions. So who was involved in the 2025 update? And just to give you, a perspective of the 2025 update, in our 2018 plan, FEMA had an extensive list of things we could improve upon. So in order to do that, we wanted to make sure we brought in a planning consultant who actually had experience in hazard mitigation plans. That's where Michael Baker came in, along with Smith Planning and Design. They have worked on mitigation plans throughout the state. I think Smith Planning designed the city of Annapolis. We also worked with our state agency, federal, Maryland Department of Emergency Management, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and also our local stakeholders, other county agencies, the town of Highland Beach, with the public, and we'll discuss a little bit who made up this Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee. So here is a list of those who were involved in the committee. And these were a series of meetings that we could talk a little bit more about the work groups that were formed. But again, we wanted to make sure to incorporate all of those who not only had a role and authority to regulate land use and development of property, but also were able to implement plans, procedures, laws in terms of supporting mitigation projects and programs that we had identified. A couple of things that are also important, we did include entities that provided administrative and managerial support, especially with the public participation. And of course, money is important. We can't ignore that. We can't do a lot of these things without capital projects and grant funds. So we really tried to make sure that those agencies were incorporated as well. A little bit of the timeline. We did break out this timeline, so it'll be a couple of slides, but just wanted to highlight that we had our kickoff meeting in April 2024. We launched the webpage in June 2024, and it was during this time we were trying to expedite the FEMA process in order to give us the grant to start this project. That didn't come until July 2024. But so we try to start even earlier to make sure that we got a head start. So you can see that even with some of the group meetings that we had, one of the groups was social equity and vulnerability. The other group was floodplain management. We wanted to make sure to try to get as much of a start as possible because we knew we were in a short time frame. Public meetings that started in September and lasted through December 2024. We'll talk a little bit about that. Met with the Resilience Authority during the summer. Midpoint meeting was in December 2024 with the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee to show them how far we'd gotten, some of the public input that we've had, to go through the plan, the drafts of the plans that we had. That was shared in January 2025 for comments. February 2024, we had the Mitigation Solutions Workshop. We'll talk a little bit about the top solutions that the group developed. And then in April 2025, we did submit it to the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And just a little bit about that, we do submit it to MDEM. They provide comments based on the guidelines FEMA had developed. With the change in the administration, there was a question on did these guidelines change or not, but luckily we were able to have our plan measured against the established guidelines. Once we received comments from the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, we incorporated those comments, submitted it to FEMA, as you can see, and then we got the approval at the end of May 2025 for that. And then now we're meeting, obviously, with the Planning Advisory Board, incorporating any comments or updates you might have before we do submit it to the County Council. So we obviously want to make sure this plan works for Anne Arundel County, not only from the public perspective, but obviously from the PAB. We are hoping, to introduce legislation in the fall to the County Council, and that we have October 2025 as the final approval once it's adopted not only by the County Council, but Highland Beach. But it might be December, but we have incorporated that time frame with that understanding. All right, so the natural hazards identified in the 2025 update. I don't have to probably read the list. You can see flood, always flood. Obviously, with the more severe weather impacts that we had, that is always of concern. As you can see in the others, we have experienced it, especially with, luckily not dam failure, but tropical systems, drought, extreme temperatures, what we're experiencing here, severe winter weather, thunderstorm, we just had that go through today. We just had an EF tornado even last week. So obviously, these are the hazards that we want to make sure that we address, and whether the magnitude of that obviously is explained in the plans and some of the data on why these were chosen. And again, the human-made hazards in 2025, again, this was new. Emerging infectious disease, obviously coming on the heels of COVID, civil disturbance and active assailant, and even just in the climate that we are in the last couple of years, making sure that those get addressed, not only in what we talk about mass, maybe civil disturbance, but obviously active assailant incidents have gone up throughout the nation in the last couple of years. Transportation accidents, obviously roadway accidents are still a huge issue nationwide. So that is obviously something that the group had discussed and had elevated in terms of human-made hazards. And then cyber attacks. We had discussed, we recently went through a cyber incident in the county. More prevalent, you hear about it in the news every day.
Can I ask a question? Could you go back one slide, 2 slides now, please?
This one?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So, natural hazards, and maybe this is different, and you can correct me, but we've had some failures with our sewer systems and leaks into our waters. How is that addressed?
So, I mean, those can be one of the impacts of a natural hazards, right? And that, when you talk about the breakdown of like a sewage system, is that what you were talking about?
Right.
That could be caused by a storm. That could be caused by even a cyber incident. I know there's many different ways that could happen. So that could be one of the consequences of one of these natural hazards or one of the man-made.
Thank you.
So how were the hazards identified in the plan? And this is where we're going to talk about flooding because that is the top one for the natural hazards. And so I'm going to take you through the steps for flooding in terms of kind of the data that was collected and discussed. So one is the description of it, obviously, location, extent, magnitude, the past occurrences, probability of future events, the hazard risk assessment. With flooding, especially Highland Beach, that is obviously a concern there. The impacts, kind of like Jess was brought up, what are the impacts to people, structures, systems, and resources? Future land use and development trends, and considerations for the next planning cycle, because these do have to be updated every 5 years. So a lot of what happens in between will be reflected in the next plan. So we're going to talk about flooding. A little bit of, especially with the flooding, we took bits and pieces of coastal flooding, the riverine flooding. And so we just wanted to make sure we described, at least for you, overall what we're looking for in flooding. So this is defined as the accumulation of water within a water body and the overflow of excess water into adjacent floodplain lands. And so we also go into what a floodplain is the land adjoining the channel of a river, stream, ocean, lake, or other water course or water body that is susceptible to flooding. So number one, hazard description. Location, extent, and magnitude of flooding. So obviously we have an extensive coastline, right? And there's a lot of areas that flood. And so going into the extent, Arundel has the second highest amount of repetitive lost properties in the state of Maryland. We have 4.1 flood events annually. And then the magnitude. From 2003 to 2024, we have seen 1 death and $121,000 in property damage due to flooding. Then we go into the past occurrences. In the 2018 plan, it listed the database from the National Centers for Environmental Information, listed 71 flood events between 2003 and 2018, with 4 resulting in property damage. There's been additional 15 flood events since 2018 that we've been tracking. Again, the 4.1 flood events annually. And from 1998 to 2024, we have experienced 75 coastal flooding events, and that's 2.88 events for the coastal flooding. Again, you can see why with the past occurrences, location, extent, magnitude, that it comes to be our number one natural hazard. Go to the next slide. We talk about also the risk assessments. And one of the things I wanted to highlight, especially when it comes to flooding and also another area hazard that we are concerned about is dams. Now, we have no high hazard potential dams in Anne Arundel County yet. Alex or Carrie, you can correct me. I think there is one that is coming soon.
I believe it's being looked at
Yeah.
by the state and FEMA to kind of address what that would look like to make it a high hazard dam. So they're in the process of kind of reevaluating it and deciding whether it would be or not.
So if that does become a high hazard dam, obviously the next iteration of this hazard mitigation plan will be updated. But we still have two dams that are nearby that are high hazard that could cause flooding damage to our county, and that's the Duckett Dam and the Liberty Dam. So with the Duckett Dam, that is a high hazard dam located in Laurel, and then if that breached, it would cause damage in Maryland City, Odenton, Crofton, and Davidsonville. And that would impact homes, businesses, highways, bridges, wastewater treatment facilities. So obviously we coordinate a lot with Howard County, with WSSC, who operates the dam, to make sure that we understand what their plan is in terms of what they would look like in response actions and recovery actions, and to make sure that we were prepared. So Liberty Dam is located west of Baltimore. It would, in terms of Anne Arundel County, about 25.37 miles of roadway are at risk. Or about 0.85% of the total roads. So obviously along that roadway, you have businesses, houses, etc., that would be impacted by that. Again, coordinating with the jurisdiction in terms of what their plan is. They send us the plan, we take a look at it. Obviously, that informs our response and recovery efforts as well. Just wanted to highlight Highland Beach. Obviously, flooding is a concern there as well. There are 79 housing units, and 55 are presently occupied and used for residents. There are a few structures in the 1% annual chance floodplain in the town. As development has occurred, it has moved more inland from the Chesapeake Bay, so that's good. So there's a small residual exposure, for flooding for structures in the jurisdiction. But obviously, even a small amount of flooding can cause environmental damage to that town. Impacts to people. Going along with, again, our top hazard of flooding, coastal storms. Property damage, obviously, we've seen that happen with flooding, right? Houses, businesses, etc. Sustain damage, especially with repeated flooding. Life safety, especially if you have flash flooding events that could come very suddenly, can cause drowning, could cause other physical trauma, especially if you have flooding in coordination with a storm that can cause down power lines. Again, a lot of life safety issues. Health risks in terms of flooding, the environmental risks of what is in the water when it does start to flood, contaminated water, wastewater infrastructure. If something does happen to that infrastructure and it starts to leak and stuff, what is in that water? Again, transportation, just even with the storm, I mean, it wasn't flooding, but there are downed trees, but there are road closures. And especially in Anne Arundel County, that has become a common occurrence in terms of closed roads. That impacts not only how people get to and from homes, conducting daily life, but also emergency services, right? And we have plans in place, obviously, if there are certain road closures, pre-staging emergency services, especially in the peninsulas, to make sure you still have the level of service that residents need, but that does cause a disruption of services especially in order to serve the community. Stress on infrastructure. I know we touched upon this, not only for roadways, but for our public health, in terms of hospital infrastructure, in terms of bridges, roadways, etc. And even with wastewater facilities and other facilities that provide those critical services to the county. Increased risk of future flooding, right? Once the area floods, it's prone to even more flooding. And so especially with the sea level rise, we've just seen the increase in that risk of flooding. So impacts to structures. Arundel County has a total of 109 repetitive lost properties, and I've included the definition of what FEMA defines as repetitive lost property. Properties for which 2 or more losses of at least $1,000 each have been paid under the National Flood Insurance Program within any 10-year period since 1978. So these are the top 3 communities that have those repetitive lost properties. It's really not a surprise that these are the properties. A total of 2,642 flood insurance policies are active within Anne Arundel County. As of July 30th, 2024, we have 10 flood insurance policies within the town of Highland Beach. We do have an extensive critical facility and community lifeline database. And what I mean by community lifeline, obviously the services that sustain the functioning of society, but also the infrastructure of our community. Not much is in the flood, the special flood hazard area. The ones that are within, I know it says fixed hazardous material storage sites and a sewer pump stations. The one hazardous material site is AT&T, and the 2 sewer pump stages at Patapsco Park and Patapsco. Okay. So obviously things that we have to keep an eye on to ensure that if those critical facilities are looking to be impacted, that we monitor that. Impacts to the systems. Again, we talked a little bit about this, especially in Anne Arundel County, coastal flooding is something that is talked about a lot, but there are roadways inland that frequently flood, right? Roadways and bridges that are impacted. Lithicum, Maryland City, Glen Burnie, Odenton. That's why we had some of our public outreach meetings in these areas, because we understand that those roadways can flood as well and cause a lot of the same disruptions to transportation, to services, to roadways, etc. Again, impacting daily activities, road closures. And again, with the infrastructure systems, I know that was also pointed out, roads, stormwater systems, drainage systems can be impaired or rendered ineffective due to the flooding. And going through our 10 steps, impacts to natural, historic, and cultural resources. Of course, flooding can disrupt the natural environment, the balance of landscapes, and their natural ability to mitigate flood risks, causing erosion of riverbanks, altering the sediment deposition patterns, vegetation, aquatic ecosystems, and basically the natural barriers that we have to help mitigate some of the floods can actually destroy that when it gets extensive. We also have thousands of significant historic sites, archaeological sites, cemeteries, scenic and historic roads. And so obviously with these historic structures, some of them listed in the National Register of Historic Places, what are their vulnerability to flooding? So we have a total of 161 that are located within the 1% chance floodplain. And that includes structures, sites, and districts in which we highlight Highland Beach in terms of that. We also look at future land use and development. As you know, our general development plan 2040, the planned land use map, all of these plans are integrated, right? One cannot work without the other. We were trying to make sure that the plans speak to each other, that we've looked at the other plans. And so how does hazard mitigation plan inform Plan 2040 as it goes through its various iterations, and especially with the analysis and development trends and the annual development measures and indicators report. That segues into the additional plans that we integrated into the 2025 update. As you can see, there are numerous plans. I think some even worked with the same consultant, which was nice because they understood the information that was in the plans and were able to incorporate a lot of the data. So the sea level rise, climate resilience action strategy, land preservation, parks, recreation, a lot of the studies that are also being done in the Deal Shady side, adaptation study, the roadway vulnerability study, obviously all the FEMA guidelines we wanted to ensure that we were following in this plan. And then of course our emergency operations plan, which we are currently updating. We're basically redoing it because we understand that community lifelines is more about the response and recovery of the services that we provide to our community, and making sure to address the infrastructure and what happens if the infrastructure is impacted. And then future considerations and future conditions. Because obviously things change. We have to update this plan every 5 years, but things change. So even, getting the data from 2024, we had a cyber incident that happened in 2025. Obviously, that's going to be incorporated into our next plan. But focusing on the flooding, the frequency of flooding, and the events that cause that, we know that that's going to increase. We have seen that increase time and time again. We've been lucky with hurricane season so far. But obviously we have had above average seasons for many, many years now. Some areas will become permanently inundated, making them uninhabitable in the long term. That is no surprise to us that might happen. And that areas that currently experience regular flooding will see those conditions worsen. And again, we have other plans and data that tell us that. And while we're trying to, with this hazard mitigation plan and some of the actions we're taking, mitigate some of what is happening, this is why some of the solutions we've come up with hopefully will reduce some of those impacts. And I am sure you've also seen, and this is nationwide as well as Anne Arundel County, that areas that you had little flooding or didn't flood at all are now experiencing that. So considerations for the next planning cycle. We touched upon that a little bit, but these are the questions that for the next 5 years, obviously, that we're going to be taking a look at. Any flood hazard events that have occurred since the plan was adopted, new data, methodology, any research, especially with assessing risk and vulnerability, any new analysis, especially from any of our partners in county government, to new projects that analyze flooding, any change in the population, in the environment, the building codes, the economy. Again, all those play a key role, obviously, in how we try to make Anne Arundel a sustainable and resilient county. And then obviously as climate changes, increases, evolves, is there, a new level of risk or vulnerabilities to these events? So, I talked a little bit about the county agencies that were involved in the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee. So obviously It was great to get our stakeholders' input, but we wanted to have the public's input as well. So we did it in a couple of ways. And this is one of the ones in 2018 that FEMA really emphasized we had to improve on. So we really took that to heart, try to make sure we reach the community in many different ways. One of them was a Survey Monkey. We had paper copies in English and Spanish, as well as online, to at least get the additional information on what the mitigation strategies for certain communities might feel would be appropriate. We also used ArcGIS. That was used in public meetings to identify specific hazard locations so that they could pinpoint on the map using that technology. Again, this survey gathered obviously the public's perceptions on what hazards they deemed the most important and what they would like to see included in the plan update. We also attended community events where we thought that hazard mitigation had a connection to or had different populations that we wanted to make sure understood what this plan update was about. So you can see some of the events that we attended: River Days, obviously Deal, and BaySox. We wanted to make sure we touched upon all areas of the community, separate meetings with the Highland Beach Mayor, and the Hispanic Heritage Festival. Again, we wanted to make sure we reached all communities. We held public meetings, 8 of them. The libraries were a great partner in terms of having us have meeting places and being able to present to whoever came. Sometimes we had 1 person, sometimes we had 10 people. As you know, public outreach is a hit or miss, but we wanted to make sure we presented as many opportunities that the public could have in order to. FaceTime video. Oops, let me. We wanted to make sure that.
Zoom. Are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you mute yourself, please? Thank you. Again, we wanted to make sure we presented as many opportunities. So we did 8 in-person hazard mitigation meetings. The final meeting, you can see Office of Emergency Management Auditorium. We held virtually and in person to make sure, again, people had that opportunity to engage, understand what we were doing, and provide feedback. Again, why is it important? We talk about the whole community. There's many different communities in this county. There's many different areas of impact, and residents live through this. They live through the impacts that a lot of these hazards cause. So we want to make sure we included what they thought would be appropriate mitigation actions. We might know as government, but the public has just as much input, and we wanted to make sure to incorporate that. Because flooding, I'll take flooding in particular, impacts homes, impacts communities. So if you don't build those partnerships, if you don't make them aware of what these hazards are, what the mitigation actions we're taking, they're not going to be able to recover. They're not going to be able to become more resilient. And again, this all delves into the other plans that are coming about with land use that are already there. Wanted to make sure that the public understood the whole picture is being taken into consideration. This was the Mitigation Action Workshop. I think this was the one that was conducted in February. If I got my timing right, this is where we had the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee get together, take a look at the draft of the plan, and develop some of the new mitigation actions for the 2025. And they went through an extensive day-long going through the plan, the data collection, and developing the priorities of what it would be. So I'll go through some of the ones. Enhancing our mass notification and alerting system. Right now we use Civic Ready, and in the federal system for FEMA, there's a notification called iPause. And so we want to make sure that when we know especially with severe weather, but with any incident that might be coming, to alert the community as best as we can and to encourage them to sign up for alerts, whether it's through Civic Ready, whether it's through some other app in their phone, or to at least take the warning seriously. I know especially people sometimes tend to dismiss warnings, whether that's a thunderstorm warning, tornado warning, but that can cause a lot of damage in your neighborhood, even localized damage. I will say the storm that came through, there are 2 houses that have been severely damaged by falling trees. We want to make sure people are safe, heed the warnings, and understand the events that might occur. HydroNet gauges and Mesonet. HydroNet is a program in coordination with the University of Maryland, along with a company, HydroNet, that installs sea level rise gauges along the coastline in Anne Arundel County. Right now, our main sea level rise gauge is around Annapolis, but as we know, there's the rest of Anne Arundel County and the coastline. So we've been actively pursuing installing those gauges so that we get better data in terms of when storms come in, how high the sea level rises, and especially in terms of analyzing the data and what actions we can take, especially for those coastal communities. One of the things, especially with the gauges, is that once we get, a couple of months of data, we can produce, a future projection of what during certain time periods during the year, what the levels might look like, and so kind of future predict what our response and what the recovery can be. Mesonet or weather stations. That's also done in conjunction with the University of Maryland and the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, installing weather stations that obviously, when there is severe weather, collects the data. DPW does have weather stations also around there. So the addition of additional stations will enhance our data collection as well. Something that we always can improve upon is pre and post disaster public information campaigns. Again, what information we help to have the community prepared, but also when a disaster happens, what resources are out there, and especially after disaster, how can they improve to prepare for the next time? So it's a cycle, and we want to make sure that everybody gets the information that is needed. Partnering with the county agencies and other departments to provide emergency preparedness outreach to vulnerable groups and populations. We have several vulnerable populations in the community, and some of them cannot be reached through the traditional methods that we rely on now in terms of communication with social media, etc. So making sure that we coordinate and collaborate with our partner agencies in order to get that message, whether that's, playing preparedness bingo at the senior centers, visiting schools to make sure to give presentations at any grade level on how to best be prepared. That's something that our office is really focusing on and that we're expanding in the future. Placement of signage and activation of flood warning devices. So that is in conjunction with some of the other agencies in DPW in terms of floodgates. We talked about the HydroNet gauges, but also obviously with peninsulas, if a certain road floods, it's their only way in, one way out, one way in. So what can we do to work around that, right? And we can wait for SHA and the state to maybe build new roads or come up with new projects. But what we're really looking at in the county is if there are available detours, coordinating with DPW, police, and fire to open up those roadways so that if there is one way out, one way in, one way out, road that's impacted, we can lessen some of the impacts of not only emergency response, but people able to get home, people being able to access the services that they need. So that is something that we have started with Pure Waterway. And hopefully we can build upon that in terms of solutions to work around warnings, but also making sure that the public understands signage and have information ahead of time, right, on how to best mitigate that. So the next 5 years, obviously, continue to collect data, continue to work with our county partners, continue to get feedback from the public, because a lot will change in 5 years, right? And that is not only with our natural hazards, but with our man-made hazards as well. And again, this is something that we have to do every 5 years, so make sure we collect the data and the events that have happened in the 5 years. That's key in order to make our next plan even better. Next steps, obviously presenting to you, incorporating the feedback that you might have, the comments, having your approval, and then having the county adopt the plan through the county council. The town of Highland Beach also has to go through their own separate process of adopting the plan through an ordinance. And then once that is all done from Highland Beach and from the county, the FEMA will give the final approval of the plan, and we're hoping to have that by the end of the year. Questions? I will say that is a lot of information. I did not go through each of the natural hazards or the man-made hazards, but it follows that same 10-step pathway that I showed you. Also, for the mitigation actions that the Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee developed, there are a lot more in the plan. We would be here for 2 hours if I went through all of it. And if that's what you want for the next time, I'm more than happy to do that. But please, I know it is a long plan, but especially if you want to take a look at some of the mitigation solutions that the committee has developed that hopefully we can do in the next 5 years. There's a lot of good stuff there that's been started, that we hope to start. And again, with each of the hazards, whether it's natural, man-made, it's a high-level look at it with some of the data, but there are in the county operational plans behind it. So this is not meant to be an operational standard operating procedure kind of plan, but to give a broad overview of hazard mitigation in the county.
Thank you, Preeti, for your presentation. I do have one question. Since we have the largest and a major airport in our county, where was that discussed in this plan under man-made hazards in the event that there's a major, plane crash?
In terms of, it was more discussed in the natural hazards portion, especially with flooding events that causes property damage. But I know in terms of if we wanted to incorporate even the man-made, that, cyber obviously could bring down an airport. I think that's happened, not at BWI in particular, but in other areas. But I know that was discussed in terms of more of the flooding. Carrie or Alex, do you have any more insight on that?
Yeah, I think it's the same things we looked at when we talked about the sewage overflow versus flooding, where those natural hazards would affect the BWI as we looked at it as transportation. So that cyber attack would affect our transportation, and then that would affect the BWI, or the flooding that would cut off roads that would affect transportation, which would be BWI. So all the hazards kind of look at those critical facilities and those different things, and that's kind of how it would melt into it together. And then, Carrie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, we can certainly look at the transportation accidents that could occur at BWI itself, and how that may impact the region, and the county's response to that. That may not be specifically outlined in the hazard mitigation plan, but there are other plans within the county Office of Emergency Management that would be activated and put into place to assist with those types of responses for transportation accidents.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth?
I have a question along the same lines, since we are so close to some military installations and you brought up airports. What about Fort Meade and what about National and, or, you know, all those military installations around us? How is that incorporated into the plan?
I know for the military installations, and maybe Michael can refresh my memory, there has been joint studies, joint projects with the military installations. I think what maybe the one I'm thinking about is with Annapolis and the Navy.
That's correct, PT.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 2 years ago, we went through a process collaboratively with the U.S. Navy, City of Annapolis, and Anne Arundel County, develop underneath a Department of Defense framework, a resiliency plan based around that institute. Of course, you know, the Navy installment there in Annapolis relies on, you know, county water and city services and transportation and power networks that are surrounding it. And the Resilience Authority has been in discussions with Fort Meade as well about conducting a parallel or similar study with Fort Meade. And I think that's pending grant funding to begin that effort.
I appreciate that. And anything to do with Andrews? Have we even looked at Andrews? Andrews Air Force Base in Prince George's County.
Right. I know it's outside of the county boundaries, so it kind of gets beyond our
Yeah.
jurisdiction. At the state level, you know, the state also does, you know, hazard planning, and I think, you know, there's
Okay.
interrelationships that happen at different levels of government with those things.
Yeah, the state does have a state
That's
has
more visible. Andrews is definitely more visible than anything else. And so if they're right outside of DC and where the president lands all the time is something to keep in mind.
I mean, definitely. And as Carrie said, we do have different plans that would touch upon our response and recovery, especially in the national capital region, especially in DC and with other jurisdictions as well. And we do collaborate a lot in terms of the planning when there are events that occur.
So
Thank you.
I have a question to follow up with that. But I guess since Anne Arundel County splits right at Baltimore City, and there's a lot of water right there with the inner harbor, would you have margin of error to accept the excess overload from the city?
I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if anybody else does in terms of
That
the
that
excess
actually
of
might that actually might get addressed in our evacuation plan, the regional evacuation plan that the Office of Emergency Management is working on currently.
Oh, I thought you meant environmental. Or were you talking about people? Oh,
Both. Sorry, yeah, both of them.
yeah.
Because you know it'll be a big impact, especially with the sewage plant right there as well. So just I was asking.
No, I think that's a good question. We could probably delve into a little bit. And maybe just look at some of the other plans. Yeah, but Carrie's right in terms of people. If there were an event to happen, there's the consideration of there would be people coming into our county if there was something happening in the city or other jurisdictions. But there's also where would our residents evacuate to? And so there's a lot of regional planning on that end if a regional event were to occur.
Okay, board members, any other questions?
No.
No?
I guess I
yeah.
have one more.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Sure.
We
Lawrence, go
have
ahead.
the Colonial Pipeline that goes from Florida to wherever. And I know that was recently maybe dealt with by somebody, some hackers, and definitely put a damper on a few different states. And since that goes right through like the area I live in,
Mhm.
do we have anything kind of in process to kind of deal with that?
Actually, great timing. We are conducting a joint exercise with Colonial Pipeline that actually includes BWI. We are currently in the training and exercise phase of that. And that would activate our emergency operations plan and other plans as well in terms of what that response might be. But obviously the collaboration is very important.
Okay, very good. Board members, are there any other questions? Okay. Edward? No?
No, sir.
Okay. With that, Jessica, do we have anybody that is signed up to speak?
No, no one signed up ahead of time. I do see 2 attendees on the call. I know one works for OEM, but if anybody from the public would like to speak, that's up to you guys if we want to take extra.
Okay, well, I'm going to say this, the Planning Advisory Board now will open for public hearing. Every speaker will be afforded 2 minutes. When you're called, please come wave your hand on the Zoom screen and we'll give you the floor. And please, if you are speaking, provide your name, address, and your comments. Keep them limited to 2 minutes. The Planning Advisory Board, once we hear your comments, will deliberate and make recommendations on the draft at our next meeting on July the 23rd.
And I do want to encourage, if there's any questions in between that you want more information, more data, etc., please let me know, especially as you go through 412 pages.
Yes. Jessica, is there anybody that wishes to speak at this time?
I don't see any hands. Like Gus said, you can use the raise hand feature under reactions if you'd like to speak. I'll give you like another 15 seconds or so.
And our written comments will be open until July the 15th. So if you can't speak tonight, then send us your comments up until the 15th of July.
I'm still not seeing any movement, Gus, so I don't think any members of the public would like to speak.
Then the record for spoken testimony is now closed. Again, written testimony will be accepted up until midnight, Tuesday, July the 15th. At this point, Petrie, thank you very much. And we are ready now to move on to the Office of Planning and Zoning on their annual measures and indicators report for the calendar year 2025. So the presentation is from Mark Burt. And Mark, we'll turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So give me a second here to share my screen. Okay, it looks like it's sharing. And we'll get underway here. Good evening, PAB members. I'm Mark Burt. I'm the Planning Administrator for the Research and GIS section within the Office of Planning and Zoning. Tonight, I'm here to present some of the findings of the annual Development Measures and Indicators report for calendar year 2024. So let me move this out of the way here. All right, so the annual Development Measures and Indicators report is required under the Land Use Article of the Annotated Code of Maryland. The statute requires local planning commissions to prepare an annual report that addresses growth and development by reporting comprehensive zoning, comprehensive plan and zoning changes, growth-related infrastructure improvements, and development in various stages of completion inside and outside of the priority funding areas. Section 1-207B of the Maryland Land Use Article requires that each county or municipal planning commission or planning or board approve an annual report for the reporting year. In addition, the annual report must be filed with the Anne Arundel County Council and the Maryland Department of Planning. The report has two main sections that we'll review tonight: the amendments and growth-related changes in development patterns that focuses on planning and zoning efforts that have affected development, and a measures and indicators section, which reports the amount of development within the priority funding areas. So in addition to this annual report, the Office of Planning and Zoning is currently preparing a building and development application report in response to the passage of House Bill 131. HB 131 was passed by the Maryland General Assembly in 2024, and it requires local jurisdictions with at least 150,000 residents to report information about building and development permit applications that includes a residential housing component as part of the development by the local jurisdiction, the immediately preceding the calendar year, to the Maryland Department of Planning and the Department of Housing and Community Development. The Anne Arundel County Office of Planning and Zoning includes this report as a separate reporting form from the Annual Development Measure Report, beginning with calendar year 2024. The data and time frame used in the HB 131 report is different from the Measures and Indicators report. While Measures and Indicators report looks at approved subdivisions and building permits that occur within a calendar year, HB 131 report analyzes subdivisions and building permits where the submittal date was within the calendar year. Given these differences, the total number of subdivisions and building permits will be different between these two reports. In addition, the HB 131 report does not consider the priority funding areas. Now, like I said, the HB 131 report is still in draft, and we will provide it to the PAB for review when it becomes available. We won't be presenting it, just for review. Okay, so the amendments and growth-related changes in development patterns section provides an overview of any significant changes in development patterns or programs and policies that impact development patterns. So some amendments and growth-related changes in development patterns are region plans and comprehensive zoning recommendations were reviewed by PAB in fall of 2023 for the first three regions, regions 2, 4, and 7. These region plans and comprehensive zoning bills were adopted by the County Council in spring and summer of 2024. While not part of the 2024 annual report, I'm pleased to report that the second set of region plans, regions 1, 3, and 9, kicked off in October 2023 and were adopted by County Council in May and June of 2025. They'll be in next year's report. And the third set of region plans, regions 5, 6, and 8, kicked off earlier this year and will be approved later next year. So they'll be included in the 2026 report. So for the administrative rezonings, there were none reported in this calendar year. There were 33 zoning text amendments in this calendar year. Table 1-2 displays a summary of the zoning text amendments and can be found on pages 4 through 6 of the report. There were no priority funding area changes approved by the Maryland Department of Planning in 2024. There were 2 water and sewer plan changes in 2024. Bill 9324 changed the flow conveyance for the Piney Orchard sewer service area from the Piney Orchard WRF to the Patuxent WRF. Bill 6424, this included a property on Veterans Highway and 2 undeveloped parcels that were moved out of the no service area category within a rural service area into the planned service category in the Broadneck service area. There were 12 major transportation projects completed in 2024 that included intersection improvements, sidewalk installations, and operations and drainage improvements. A list of these projects can be found on in Table 1-3, Transportation Projects Completed in CY 2024 on page 8 of the report. In 2024, there were 4 school improvement projects completed to add capacity to accommodate an additional 598 elementary school students, 127 middle school students, and 1,934 high school students. And the table on the screen details those projects. So we'll get into the measures and indicators section of the report. And this section is required for jurisdictions that issue more than 50 residential building permits in a year. Before I get into the measures and indicators, I want to talk a little bit about the priority funding areas. We focus a lot on those and just want to give a little update, little information on them. The priority funding areas are existing communities and places designated by local governments where local governments want state investment to support future growth and coordinate efforts to support economic development. The PFAs were established to provide geographic focus for state investment in growth and to strategically direct the use of limited state funds for roads, water and sewer plants, economic development, and other growth-related needs. So all municipalities in Maryland qualify as a priority funding area, including areas inside the Washington and Baltimore beltways, areas within the state that are already designated as an enterprise zone, a neighborhood revitalization area, a heritage area, and any existing industrial land. So Maryland counties can designate areas as priority funding areas that meet guidelines for intended use, availability of plans for water and sewer systems, and permitted residential density. Areas eligible for county designation include existing communities, areas where industrial or other economic development is desired, and areas planned for new residential communities, which will be served by water and sewer systems and also meet density standards. So jumping into the measures and indicators, in 2024, Anne Arundel County issued 31 commercial building permits. 81% were within the priority funding area. 963 residential building permits were issued, 98% of which were in the priority funding area. So Anne Arundel County has set a goal of 80% of new development to occur within the priority funding areas. This goal has been exceeded for the 3rd consecutive year. The 5-year average for new residential building permits issued within the priority funding area also increased to 82%. Displayed here is a heat map of the density of commercial and residential building permits issued in 2024. The gray areas of the map are the priority funding areas. The areas of yellow on the map are the areas with the highest density of permits issued. Looking at the spatial distribution of building permits issued in the county for 2024, growth at the Parkside and watershed developments and an apartment complex at 1570 Annapolis Road stand out in the western section of the county. In the residential building permit type trend chart, the mix of residential building permits is displayed for the past 12 years. Single-family detached are in orange. Townhouse developments are in blue, dark blue. Multifamily in light blue. So over the last 20 years, the county has issued over 50,000 residential building permits. In the early 2000s, more single-family detached permits were issued. As land has gotten more expensive and scarce, the trend is for more multifamily and townhouse developments. This trend has continued even with the decreased number of residential building permits issued. 2024 did see the lowest number of building permits issued since data collection began in 2021. There was a 9% decrease in building permits issued between 2023 and 2024. The 963 new building permits issued in 2024 compared to 1,063 approved in 2023. Since 2001, residential permits issued has decreased by almost 69%. Before residential building permits are issued, the residential development goes through the OPZ development approval process, ending in an approved subdivision plat. The 12 residential subdivisions approved in 2024 continue to be below the 10-year average of 35 and the 5-year average of 19 subdivisions approved. 83% of the new subdivisions approved are within the priority funding area. And over the past 10 years, the number of residential subdivisions approved has declined by 78.5%. The number of new residential lots approved did see a slight rebound in 2024. The 648 new residential lots approved was an almost 391% increase from 2023. The vast majority of the lots approved were in the priority funding area. With the approval of residential projects by OPZ comes the approval of residential units. 653 residential units were approved in 2024, a 10% decrease from last year. Even with the continued decrease in units approved, 99% of the residential units were approved in the PFA. Elizabeth, I can see you have your hand up for a question.
Thank you. My question is, with this slide as well as the last slide, when you say residential units, are we talking about individual single family units? Or are we talking about minor subdivisions that don't have to be labeled as major under 5? Or can you explain, please?
These are all the units that approved from our subdivisions. So if we go back to the previous slide, we see we have 648 lots from those subdivisions. So we'll go back one more. The 12 subdivisions approved resulted in 648 lots. On those 648 lots, there are 653 residential units. You could look at it that way. If this is what has been approved to be built.
And if I can add, that's inclusive of single family homes, townhomes, and multifamily, correct?
Correct.
Oh. Okay. Sorry, say that again, Michael. You're saying single family, townhouses, and multifamily,
Correct.
but the total units are 650.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
And so it's important to look at, as he goes across these multiple graphs, they're kind of, as Mark mentioned, it kind of goes through the process. First, you start with the actual building permits. So that's actually kind of like the end of the process. You know, and after you got everything approved, you can get your building permit. Now we've kind of backed up to the subdivisions, which then create the lots. First, you have to have the lot, then you can have the residential building permit. So
Okay.
this starts to give you a look at, the lot's been approved. Then in the next year or 2 or 3, you should see the building permits get issued for these lots. So these numbers kind of give you an inkling of what will happen in the next few years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is
helps.
the number.
I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
This
Thank
is this 653 residential units. This is what was approved through our development process. Okay. So that's everything that was approved in 2024. Now, this is a number of units constructed, the number of units built through building permits. So, we saw 1,508 units constructed in the county, which is a 43% increase over 2023. The vast majority were within the PFA. Now, with the units constructed and the units approved, we can see that there is a little bit of a disconnect. So units that do not have a building permit issued are considered in the pipeline, and the residential development pipeline tracks the cumulative number of housing units that have been approved through the OPZ development process. So they have a signed plat, they do not have it, and they have not applied for a building permit as of yet. Likely they're working through the IMP grading permit process, or the actual grading work is being completed prior to pulling building permits. So the chart on the screen now is displaying the number of single-family dwelling units in yellow, single-family attached units in green, apartment units in dark blue, and condominium units in light blue. For the past 11 months of data, the residential pipeline has remained above 4,300 units, peaking in March 2024 with 4,741 units. As of February 2024, the residential development pipeline stands at 3,788 units. So more development projects have been approved by OPZ over the years than projects completed with a building permit, which has led to the pipeline that we have today. So, every year we are asked to do a development capacity to ensure that the county has enough buildable land to support future development, so to support proposed and future development. So a development capacity is run at the county level. As you know, we updated the model in 2023. This model addressed potential for capacity in residential development on vacant parcels, as well as existing developed areas with redevelopment potential. Excuse me. The updated model removed undeveloped lands such as publicly owned lands, easements, and environmental constraints. The 2023 yields were based on research from recently approved residential and mixed-use projects. The density yields were applied based on zoning district, critical area overlay designation, and sewer service to estimate residential development capacity of parcels. Parcels were identified as having potential for redevelopment if the assessed value of improvements was less than half of the assessed value of the land. The 2023 model also estimated development potential in mixed use and non-residential zoning districts, which is a change from the previous methods, which only reported residential capacity. So unfortunately, the model needs to be updated again to reflect some recent zoning code changes and some new bills that have been passed, like the Housing Attainability Act, the Mixed Use Bill, and the Redevelopment Bill. Our goal is to run a updated model in spring of 2026 and report the results. Those results will also reflect the changes in the zoning code, as well as comprehensive rezoning for the first 6 regions. So that would be regions 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and 9.
Wait,
Elizabeth?
did you just say
Yes,
that you're running these in 26?
Yeah, we are, the model is currently being updated with the changes in data structure to go to Loon and some data updates and inputs. The model broke when we went to run it. So we've been working on fixing those data inputs, updating the code, the scripting in the code, with moving to Loon and working on 6 plans at once. We had to pick and choose what we needed to work on. Region plans was highest priority, and we've been working on getting the data in a spot where we can add it back into the model.
Elizabeth, this is Christina Pompa. One other thing I just want to say is these 3 bills that got adopted over the course of the last year, the Housing Attainability Act, the Mixed Use Bill, and the Redevelopment Bill, they're significantly going to change how we have to look at certain zoning categories. However, the Housing Attainability Act and the redevelopment bill are not even effective until July of this year. So that's what's really pushing us for a model update. And it's going to take, I mean, it's going to take Mark's team a while to get the model updated and to do trial runs to make sure that we're getting good results. So that's why we're pushing this off until spring of 2026.
I appreciate it. That makes sense. No, I didn't realize that. I believe me, I knew about those three and how it was going to affect all of us in the planning process and in the development process. So that's good to know. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, thank you.
I would even add a cautionary note too, that while those bills are just becoming effective, we won't get a real sense of how the development community is responding to those for several years after that till we start seeing new projects get permitted underneath these new rules. So as Mark said, when we in our development capacity model, we're looking back at actual developments, so we can say, hey, in this zone, the maximum allowed density is, say, 5 units per acre, but what you really see based on looking at the last 5 to 10 years of developments is a different number. So that's what we call the yield, what you actually achieve. And that can be it is a significant difference between what's maximally allowed in the zoning versus what we're actually seeing. So there'll need to be a deep discussion about how to structure this model for the update to say, you know, there's a lot of potential that could happen with these way these bills have changed, but we won't know the reality of those for several years to come. So I imagine we'll see some fluctuation in those numbers for the first few iterations as we're seeing what actually comes in the door through permits.
Appreciate that. Some of us will see the impact of those bills soon after July 1st. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll jump into the measures and indicators for non-residential growth for 2024. And looking at non-residential growth in the county, we refer to the, or in this context, it refers to the commercial and industrial development. There was an approximately 37% decrease in these permits issued in 2024. 49 were issued in 2023 and 31 in 2024. The vast majority of non-residential growth has occurred in the priority funding area, which continues to be a trend for non-residential growth. 81% of the industrial building permits issued by the county were in the PFA, and 100% of the lots approved and of the vast majority of gross square footage approved and constructed, and the gross square footage of, or gross acreage of non-residential subdivision area approved was located within the priority funding areas. Looking at our agricultural preservation program, there was one new area of preserved land added to the county's agricultural and woodland preservation program, and 2 new easements under the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, or MALF, that added 337 acres to the county's inventory. This brings the county's total preserved acreage to 14,189 acres. And this includes MALF, Rural Legacy, and the county's Agricultural and Woodland Preservation Program. So the purpose of Anne Arundel County's adequate public facilities ordinance is to provide adequate public schools, roads, and other infrastructure facilities in a timely manner and achieve general development plan growth objectives. It applies to water and sewer facilities, roads, schools, and other infrastructure. Each project that goes through the development process is tested for each of these APFO standards. The only APFO restrictions that are in place for current development projects are related to schools. In 2023, changes to the county's APFO law allowed adjacent public school feeder districts to accommodate new developments. The result is that there were very few new developments added to the school waiting list during the reporting period, and many projects were removed from the school waiting list. As of July 2024, the Crofton High School feeder district is the only high school closed. And this updated the school utilization information in Bill 5223. So as again, there's the map of the Crofton High School feeder district. Arundel and Crofton Middle Schools were the only two middle schools closed for 2024 to development. And there were 6 elementary schools closed to development in 5 feeder districts. Anne Arundel Feeder District had the Four Seasons in Odenton Elementary Schools closed, Belvedere Elementary in Broadneck, Crofton Woods Elementary in the Crofton Feeder District, Davidsonville Elementary in the South River Feeder District, and Tracy's Elementary School in the Southern Feeder District. So in conclusion, Anne Arundel County's pattern of development remains consistent with its plans and programs, as well as with smart growth goals. These patterns show that 98% of residential building permits for calendar year 2024 were located within the priority funding area, far surpassing the 80% goal. It also illustrates that the majority of development is located within areas of existing water and sewer infrastructure, and shows the county's strong position in continuing to preserve valuable farmland and natural resource areas. We did see a 10% decrease in residential units approved from 2023. And the number of new residential building permits has fluctuated since 2013. We did see a 9% decrease from last year in those permits issued. We heard about the APF for schools, resulting in more areas of the county being open to development, and a reduced number of schools on the school waiting list. And the population of our county has steadily grown since 1970 and has nearly doubled since 1970 in the 2020 census. And if there are any questions, I'll take them.
Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. So at this time, we're going to get any comments or discussions from the board. So board members, any questions or comments? We are going to make a recommendation on this annual measures presentation tonight. So please, board members, any comments or questions? Nobody? Elizabeth?
Sorry. I think that what we talked about an update being provided in 2026, and Christina, thank you for pointing out that those bills aren't even effective until July, maybe should be noted in the plan, in the booklet, in the report.
The state requires us to report holding capacity every 3 years. So we can put it in there that we're going to update it if you would like.
I don't know if it's I mean, it's important to me, but I don't know if it's important to everybody else and if they followed it as closely as I do.
I think, Elizabeth, next year it will definitely be noted in the report for 2025. So this is 24. I don't think we need it at this point in time to make a change, but it will be duly noted next year.
But you're saying it's going to be noted in 26.
Did I speak and say 26? I meant 20. It will be reported in 25. We'll work to update the model.
Okay.
And get everything into it.
Well, we'll run the model in 26, but we'll report for 25.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, board members, anybody raise your hand or speak up at this time? If we don't have any other questions or comments, I'd like someone to make a motion to accept the annual measures and indicators report as presented.
I motion to accept the annual
Indicators
indicators and measures
and measures report.
report.
Okay, a motion's been made by Van. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Lawrence seconds. We're going to take a vote at this time. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries.
Can I ask one more question just out of curiosity?
You may-
Did you
No,
all contract this out with the same people that you have from Towson? Is this the same people doing it?
What,
We
we're
don't-
doing what, Elizabeth?
The report,
We don't
No,
contract it
we-
out. This is done in-house.
it's not in-house, okay. My confusion, my mistake,
That's
thank
okay.
you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.
And at this time, I'd like an administrative update from Michael and Jessica to let us know our future happenings.
Okay. As you mentioned earlier, Gus, the next meeting will be July 23rd. We'll reconvene and you guys can have your deliberation on the hazard mitigation plan. And then we'll have a little break. The next things that we expect to see you come back for are going to be the region plan public hearings. This is the third round, so you guys have all kind of been through this. We'll follow a similar model that we did last year, where we'll have kind of a briefing for you to give you kind of background information on the plans as they're drafted. Then we'll go into the communities and have a series of public hearings in 3 community spaces in the 3 regions, and we'll hear the public testimony. Then following those, we'll reconvene back in the Chesapeake room in Annapolis to have our deliberations. And Jesse, do you want to review dates and places for those? You will all get, we've discussed them with you before, and we'll get you calendar invites to hold them on your calendars too as we come up to the fall, so we can program around them.
Yes, so we currently anticipate that the first meeting date will be on Wednesday, September 17th. That will be in the Chesapeake room in person. And that will be a briefing to the PAB on all 3 plans. This is very similar to what we did last year, where the three senior planners will sit up there and run you through a slide deck. And that's because a lot of the background information on how the plans were crafted is similar across all 3 regions, but they will individually touch on like the highlights for their individual regions. And then we'll meet the very next week on Wednesday, September 24th. And that will be for the Region 6 public hearing is what I have listed there. Let me just double check that. Yes, Region 6 public hearing. And I believe that one will be at, is it Crofton or Rolling Knolls? I get region 5 and 6 confuse me a little bit.
Region 6 is Crownsville, so that'll be at the Rolling Knolls Elementary School.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then next will be on the next week will be on a Tuesday, September 30th. That's because there's a holiday on the 1st. And so we're trying to avoid conflict with that. That will be the Region 8 public hearing at Southern High School. And then we'll meet again on Wednesday, October 8th. That one will be for Region 5. So that one should be at Crofton High School, I believe. Then we'll get a little break. Oh, wait, no. Yes, then we have a little break until Wednesday, November 5th, when we come back for Region 6 deliberation. That will be in the Chesapeake room. We'll meet the following week on Wednesday, November 12th for Region 8 deliberation in the Chesapeake room. And then the following week on Wednesday, November 19th, once again in the Chesapeake room. And then we'll get a break for Thanksgiving before coming back on Wednesday, December 3rd in the Chesapeake room. And I will send out an email, or I'll just send calendar invites for these dates, but I can email them out also.
Thank you, Jessica.
And I'll note that if you guys want to start to get your heads around these regions, because you guys need to know there's a lot of information. The zoning maps and potential zoning changes, recommended zoning changes are currently out for public review. And they are available on the websites. You can go to aacounty.org/region plans, and that will lead you to a portal for each of the regions. So 5, 6, and 8. And those draft zoning maps are available for public review through July 14. And as we've done in the past, there's a web page where you can go and zoom in on the maps and take a look at what's changing. So those of you kind of, where these regions overlap with where you live and the place that it could be useful. Or if you want to kind of take a tour around places that you're not that familiar with the county, you can start to look at what changes are proposed in those areas.
Also, I would like to mention that the SAC, which is a stakeholder advisory committees, they're holding their meetings and they're posted on the website. And if anybody has some extra time, please attend one of the meetings to see how the process works and see how hard the SAC and how much work they put into creating these comments and decisions that then are turned over to us.
So I do have a question.
The last meetings for the SACs will be in August. They are finished meeting right now while the draft zoning map is out.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask that.
Yeah. They'll reconvene after the public comment period's done, so they can then listen, kind of reflect on what the public said and if any new applications came in through that.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, with that, we're wrapping it up. Is board members, is there any other questions or comments? No, with that, then I'd like a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, thank you. A motion's been made to adjourn and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion passes. This meeting is adjourned. See everybody on July 23rd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.